Welcome back to Meteorology Matters. We usually talk about weather patterns.
Yeah.
But today we're going to shift gears a little bit.
Oh.
We're diving into a historical storm.
Okay.
One that shows how just individual choices can create huge ripple effects.
I like that.
Far beyond what anyone could imagine.
Yeah.
Think of it as the butterfly effect.
Okay.
But with humans' power and some really, really cloudy judgment.
Wow.
For more Meteorology Matters, make sure to follow me, meteorologist Rob Jones, on Instagram, meteorologist.
Okay.
On TikTok, TV Meteorologist, and on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane, where you can also find the Meteorology Matters podcast playlist.
Great.
Huh.
It's a compelling concept, isn't it? The idea that like a single decision, made by somebody in a position of influence can set in motion a chain of events
Right.
with such profound and often unintended consequences. It's a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and names.
Okay.
It's a tapestry
Okay.
woven from choices both big and small.
All right, so let's zoom in on one particular thread in this historical tapestry.
Okay.
We're going back to Germany in the 1920s and 30s.
Right.
A time of just immense social and political upheaval.
Yeah.
Enter Alfred Hugenberg.
Okay.
Wealthy industrialist media mogul,
Yeah.
and a man who would play just a pivotal role in shaping the course of history.
Hugenberg was a fascinating figure, driven by a potent mix of ambition, ideology, and perhaps a touch of delusion.
Okay.
He fiercely opposed communism, democracy, and immigration.
Wow.
His views aligned with a certain faction gaining traction at the time,
Yeah.
the Schmatzees party,
Yeah.
though his relationship with them was anything but straightforward.
Right. He wasn't initially a fan of the Schmatze party at all.
Right.
Saw them as too socialist for his liking.
Right.
Remember, this is a guy who built his empire on capitalist principles.
Of course.
So their policies seemed like a direct threat to his economic interests.
Precisely, but then the winds shifted, so to speak.
Yeah.
Germany was hit by a devastating economic crisis, leaving the nation reeling. And amidst this turmoil, who emerged as a beacon of hope for many desperate Germans? The Schmatze Party,
Really?
led by their charismatic and increasingly popular leader, Schmitler.
So what does Hugenberg do? Does he stick to his principles? His opposition to the Schmatze?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. Instead of continuing to oppose them,
Yeah.
Hugenberg sees an opportunity.
Oh.
He calculates that he could use Schmitler and his burgeoning movement to further his own political and economic ambitions.
So he basically thought he could ride Schmittler's coattails to power, believing, perhaps naively, that he could control this rising force.
Exactly. He begins to provide crucial financial backing to the Schmatze Party,
Wow.
leveraging his powerful media empire to spread their propaganda and bolster their image. It was a gamble, a high-stakes wager on a future he believed he could manipulate.
And was he right? Did he manage to pull the strings and come out on top?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, as history so often reveals, is far more complex than a simple yes or no. While Hugenberg's support undoubtedly played a role in Schmittler's ascent, the ultimate outcome was far from what he had envisioned.
Oh, really?
Instead of a puppet he could control, Schmittler proved to be a force of nature,
Wow.
driven by his own ambitions and a dangerous ideology that would soon engulf Germany and the world in a storm of unimaginable destruction.
Hold on right there.
Mhm.
This is where we need to pause and really unpack what happened next, because Hugenberg's decision to back Schmittler wasn't just a personal miscalculation.
Oh, yeah.
It had devastating consequences that rippled far beyond his own sphere of influence.
You're absolutely right. This is where the individual choice, the single raindrop, if you will, becomes part of a much larger and more destructive weather system.
Right.
And understanding how that happened is crucial if we want to learn from the mistakes of the past and avoid repeating them in the future.
We'll delve into those consequences and the broader implications of Hugenberg's actions after a quick pump. Stay with us.
Okay. Hugenberg's miscalculation was monumental. Instead of being the puppet master, he became swept up in the very storm he helped create Schmittler, emboldened by Hugenberg's support, and propelled by the desperation of the German people, consolidated his power with terrifying speed. The policies enacted, far from aligning with Hugenberg's vision of economic prosperity, proved disastrous for Germany and the world.
So what happened to Hugenberg? Did he realize, the gravity of his error? Did he try to course correct?
That's the tragic irony of this story. As Schmittler tightened his grip, Hugenberg found himself increasingly marginalized, stripped of his power and influence. His media empire was swallowed whole by the Schmatze propaganda machine, his economic interests sidelined in favor of the regime's agenda. It was a brutal lesson in the perils of playing with fire.
Wow, talk about a backfire. He really did end up losing everything.
Yeah.
But I imagine he wasn't the only one caught in this whirlwind, right?
Absolutely not Hugenberg's story, while Stark reflects a broader pattern of complicity and appeasement that took root in Germany during this period. Other powerful individuals and corporations motivated by a mixture of fear opportunism and a misguided belief that they could control Schmitler through their support behind the regime.
I'm curious about these other players. Who were they and what were their motivations? Was it purely about self-preservation or were there other factors at play?
Let's consider Fritz Thyssen, a prominent steel magnate. He, like many in the industrial elite, feared the rise of communism and saw Schmitler as a bulwark against the perceived threat of Bolshevism. He believed that by supporting the Schmatzees, he could safeguard his economic interests and maintain social order.
So a classic case of choosing the perceived lesser of two evils.
Yes, and it's important to understand the historical context here. The specter of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia loomed large in the minds of many wealthy Germans. They saw Schmittler's brand of authoritarianism as a way to protect their wealth and power from what they perceived as a far greater threat. Of course, history would prove this calculation to be tragically flawed.
It's fascinating how fear can really distort judgment, leading even the most rational individuals to make decisions that ultimately backfire.
Precisely. Fear can blind us to the long-term consequences of our actions, making us susceptible to manipulation and short-sighted decisions.
And it wasn't just individuals like Thyssen, right? Entire corporations got entangled with the Schmatzee regime.
You're right. Take IG Farben, for example. This chemical giant, initially wary of the Schmatzees, eventually succumbed to the allure of profit and the pressure to conform. They became deeply complicit in the regime's atrocities, supplying the Zyklon B gas used in the extermination camps. Their pursuit of economic gain came at a horrific moral cost.
It's chilling to think about how easily these companies rationalized their collaboration with the regime. Were they so blinded by profit that they simply ignored the ethical implications of their actions?
It's a complex question, and there's no easy answer. Some individuals within these companies undoubtedly raised concerns, but their voices were often drowned out by the prevailing narrative of economic necessity and national unity. The regime was incredibly adept at manipulating public opinion, framing their actions as necessary for the greater good of Germany.
It's a stark reminder of how propaganda can be used to distort reality and normalize even the most abhorrent behaviors.
Indeed, the Schmatzees were masters of propaganda, weaving a tapestry of fear, resentment, and nationalistic fervor that captivated many Germans and blinded them to the regime's true nature. They exploited existing prejudices, scapegoated minorities, and promised a return to greatness, all while systematically dismantling democratic institutions and perpetrating horrific crimes.
So we've got individuals like Hugenberg and Thyssen making Faustian bargains, and corporations like IG Farben prioritizing profit over basic human decency. It paints a pretty grim picture of human nature, doesn't it?
It's certainly a sobering reminder of the fragility of our moral compass, particularly when faced with intense pressure and the allure of power or profit. But it's also important to remember that this isn't just a story about individual failings. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of societal apathy, the erosion of democratic norms, and the seductive power of extremist ideologies.
So how do we guard against these dangers? How do we ensure that history doesn't repeat itself, that we don't fall prey to the same traps that ensnared Hugenberg and so many others?
That's a question that deserves careful consideration, and it's one that we'll explore further in the final part of our discussion.
Stay tuned, because there are some valuable lessons to be learned here. Lessons that are just as relevant today as they were in those turbulent times. So we've been talking about Alfred Hugenberg and, the dangerous choices that he made in 1930s Germany. Choices that really had far-reaching consequences. But this isn't just a history lesson, is it? It feels like there's a cautionary tale here. Something we can learn from even today.
You're hitting on a crucial point. We often study history as if it's just this detached narrative, something that happened back then.
Right.
But the reality is that the patterns of human behavior, the temptations of power, the susceptibility to manipulation, those are timeless challenges.
Yeah.
And understanding how they played out in the past can give us valuable insights into how to navigate the present.
Okay, so let's talk about those insights. What can we learn from Hugenberg's story that might help us avoid making similar mistakes today?
Well, first and foremost, I think it highlights the danger of short-sightedness,
Right.
of prioritizing immediate gains over long-term consequences.
Right.
Hugenberg, blinded by his ambition and his anti-communist fervor, failed to grasp the true nature of the force he was enabling.
Yeah.
He saw Schmitler as a tool to achieve his own goals. not realizing that he was unleashing a force that would ultimately consume him and devastate Germany.
It's like he was so focused on winning the battle that he lost sight of the war?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a trap we can easily fall into even in our own lives. Whether it's a business decision, a political stance, or even a personal relationship, it's crucial to consider the potential long-term implications of our choices. What seems like a clever maneuver in the short term can easily backfire if we fail to anticipate the ripple effects.
So how do we become more farsighted?
Yep.
How do we avoid getting caught up in the heat of the moment and making decisions that we later regret?
Well, I think it starts with cultivating a healthy dose of skepticism,
Okay.
especially towards those who promise easy solutions or appeal to our basest instincts.
Right.
The Schmatzees were masters of exploiting fear and resentment,
Right.
preying on people's anxieties and offering simplistic answers to complex problems. We need to be wary of anyone who uses similar tactics.
Right.
Anyone who seeks to divide us or erode our trust in democratic institutions.
So it's about thinking critically, questioning assumptions, and not taking things at face value.
Absolutely. We need to be informed citizens, engaged with the world around us, and willing to challenge those in power. Complacency and apathy are the breeding grounds for extremism. It's when we become disengaged, when we stop questioning and holding our leaders accountable, that dangerous ideologies can take root and flourish.
So it's not just about being smart, it's about being active. It's about speaking up, making our voices heard, and demanding better from those who represent us.
You've got it. And it's also about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a more just and equitable society. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of large-scale problems, but the reality is that even small acts of courage and compassion can make a difference. Standing up to prejudice, speaking out against injustice, supporting those who are marginalized, these are all ways we can contribute to creating a world where the mistakes of the past are not repeated.
It's about being the change we want to see in the world, right?
Precisely. And remember, history isn't predetermined. It's a constantly evolving narrative.
Right.
And we are all participants in its unfolding. The choices we make individually and collectively will determine the course of the future. Let's choose wisely.
Wow. That's a powerful thought to leave us with. It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers of history, we're active participants, and our choices matter.
Indeed. Every decision, every action sends ripples out into the world. Let's strive to make those ripples positive ones.
Thanks for joining us on this Meteorology Matters deep dive into history, folks. It's been a sobering but ultimately hopeful exploration of the power of individual choices and the importance of learning from the mistakes of the past. Remember to subscribe for more Meteorology Matters, and as always, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.